All right, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing time so far. Our next panel is titled Insurance and AI, Automation, Prediction, and More. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage. And I'll hand it over to Maryann, our moderator.
Thanks, Patricia. I am delighted to be here this afternoon with all of you and my co-panelists. I'm going to kick it off by just introducing myself. My name is Maryann Besharat, and I am the VP of Legal and Compliance at Intact Insurance, which is a P&C company in Canada. I head up a lot of the privacy and ethics related work, and as a part of my duties, I'm responsible for the governance and ethics around the use of data by Intact Insurance's Data Lab. Anything with respect to AI and machine learning and models in particular fall into my basket, whereby I give advice on some of the ethical questions surrounding these matters. Ian, would you like to go next and just introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Ian Sanders. I am a VP at Munich Re Ventures, and I lead our portfolio development team. Munich Re Venture, obviously Munich Re is a large global reinsurance company, one of the largest in the world, and Munich Re Ventures is our venture capital arm. We make early stage investments in technology companies, and we join the boards of many of those companies, including sort of pure AI companies, and we're obviously looking at them as it relates to an insurance context, but also insurtech companies that happen, or cybersecurity companies that happen to have some form of an AI component in their value proposition.
Michael.
Yes, good afternoon. So Michael Mocanu, Senior Director of Data Science. I lead the Data Insights team in Global Digital Services at Liberty Mutual. And the team is, and the business unit is charged with the technology component of our insurance operations and making sure that we provide the insurance infrastructure and functionality to sustain our employees and our customers. And AI is a big part of it. Machine learning, AI, an emerging and very active part of our investment in terms of effort and people as well.
Great. Well, I'm excited about this panel. I mean, we all come from very different areas of the insurance business, but all of us sort of leading into the impact of AI in the insurance world, which maybe to a lot of folks who are not close to insurance, they might even be surprised to see the very, very strong link between AI and insurance. So Patricia, why don't you put the first question on the screen? And so with that, as the audience sees, the question is it clear to you at this point that AI is going to overhaul many aspects of the insurance industry? And so maybe I'm gonna punt that one to Ian first, given that you're sort of the guy who scopes out all this cool, neat stuff and invests in it. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's two ways to look at it. There is what is AI going to do for insurance, and then there's what is insurance going to do for AI. And the way that it's worded is kind of seems like it's more going towards the former, although I think the latter could have a larger impact. And so if you look at the adoption of AI in insurance currently, I think they're sort of using it as from a product standpoint and then using it from an operational standpoint. And I think it's already being adopted from an operational standpoint, and it increases efficiency, accuracy, lowers cost, but it wouldn't necessarily be in my mind what I'd consider an overhaul. Using it in product, I think there's some early adoption, but there's some challenges, obviously, with regulation being a huge one. So if you think about how it gets adopted in the context of like an Amazon or a Netflix or a Facebook with a lot of sort of unsupervised learning, I think that's very challenging to do in a product standpoint, where you're having to file your rates, you're having to, it's sort of supposed to be a static model that a regulator can look at. And so I think that's one area where there's been some early adoption, but it's really unclear how that's going to go in the future. In terms of the latter, though, what can insurance do for AI? I think that is really where you're going to see insurance get changed from the outside in the sense that you have a lot of tasks that are previously been performed by humans, and where insurance would cover the risk of a failure on the part of a personal human error. Where if it's being performed by a machine, that kind of changes the entire risk framework and kind of how that gets done. So I think it's going to cause a bit of disruption over time, industry by industry, not necessarily this sort of one time everything's changing, but industry by industry. And it's going to create a risk, but also an opportunity for insurers to innovate from a product standpoint.
Yeah. Michael, do you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, so I think Ian made a lot of good points. And I'll add that the fact that we are starting to have so much data come in from a lot of different sources, including telematics, changes the paradigm of insurance to some extent, to a lot of extent. It basically, you cannot live without AI when you have, or machine learning, when you have this amount of big data coming through. You cannot deal with that complexity of the data without looking towards AI and machine learning. The value is not always clear in the use cases, but the destination, in a sense, is, meaning you have to have that AI skill set in order to take advantage of this amazing amount of data that's being generated. And we've seen it along the years, especially with pricing, as we get novel pricing and variables and whatnot, credit and that sort of thing made available to the insurance world and being able to be integrated. It's really changed how the segmentation the segmentation power of insurers. And let's face it, I mean, insurance is a commoditized business, but in the end, it's technology such as this that help companies differentiate amongst themselves. So in terms of being able to realize what the value is of some of the AI, that's an emerging field, right? The chapter hasn't been written yet fully on how do you realize value from AI projects. There's emerging areas, like I said, such as infonomics, where folks are doing a great job of trying to get their head around, how do you identify value? How do you measure it? How do you realize it? And so that's what makes this whole field so exciting. But in that sense, it creates some level of upheaval, because you do need a new skill set, new folks to get plugged in, to be able to start to chip away at this opportunity, to be able to take advantage of the AI opportunities out there. Definitely, most technologies are disruptive to a great extent, and this is no different. And I think we're kind of at the beginning of this journey to a lot of extent.
Thanks, Michael. I think the three of us have spent a lot of time with actuaries because we gave a very measured response with respect to AI and the impact on the industry. So Patrika, from there, why don't we go to our next question? Which opportunities does AI provide when it comes to insurance? Examples, please. So why don't I kick this off? There's a number of opportunities, some of which Ian and Michael already shared. But some of the key ones that jump out at me is personalized insurance. In Canada in particular, and even in the US, on the auto side, it is very, very subsidized. And so good drivers pay for bad drivers, whether we like it or not, because auto insurance is a mandatory product. And that's not always fair. And the way to get around this, such that you give a premium rate that is commensurate to the risk, is through better and greater adoption of AI, such that we're able to say that what is, let's say, a 23-year-old male, which historically, because of data points that we know that 23-year-old male drivers are more reckless, they take bigger risks than, let's say, female drivers or males above the age of 25. What personalized insurance gets to do is, if you happen to be that young man who actually is careful and doesn't take unnecessary risks, drives defensively, then through maybe telematics or greater use of AI, we will be able to give you a rate that is more reflective of the type of risk you are. So I just think this is fair. Both, I mean, this is good for the greater good. It's even good for other marginalized communities that might have a low credit rating. And if credit is able to be used in Canada and in certain provinces, it's restricted for auto, but it's permitted in property. But as you all know, your credit rating can be flawed. It can also be impacted by certain life events. You got divorced. Maybe your spouse was taking care of all the finances, so you had no clue that you guys were going into some financial problems. So number one is personalized insurance. Number two would be smarter, agile products. I'm very, very excited to see what will come out of property insurance in particular. Wouldn't it be great if you knew that, and I know it's already on the market, but wouldn't it be great if on your phone there was some type of message that pops up that says, hey, your sub pump is leaking, and you don't have a massive leak in the basement, but you've got water dripping somewhere, and you could take the preventative actions required, because at the end of the day, nobody wants their basement flooded. And maybe the third thing is a richer experience for the employee base. So I know that there's a lot of fear, especially maybe for underwriters in particular, who may think that their roles will become obsolete. I don't think the human in the loop will ever become obsolete. In fact, what I think is, if employees are prepared to embrace upskilling, then what you're going to have is a richer, more meaningful experience at work, where you pivot from administrative duties to something that's a bit more strategic in mind and really, really customer focused, such that AI can't help. So those are some of the opportunities that I see. Ian?
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I would definitely say the example that you gave is in my opinion super spot on around the like the leak detection in general. And I know one of our Hartford Steam Boiler, one of the Munich Re businesses, is working really hard on that. So I totally agree. I think everyone looks at insurance through the context of personal lines, and I totally agree that there's opportunities there. But where I think sometimes people don't look as hard, and where potentially even more opportunities could be, is on the commercial side. And I'll give an example of, you brought up autos, so I'll give an example because that's one that comes to mind. So obviously we've seen telematics-based approaches in auto. We've seen personalized driving. You've got the Metro Miles. Many of the large established insurers have adopted or have an option to adopt some sort of a telematics-based approach. And I think there's obviously improvement to underwriting. There's more personalization, but it also creates challenges. There's questions about how much of a risk profile is it going to change? How much does it create privacy issues? Is there consumer hesitation to allow an insurer into their lives? Where I think some of those issues, where it's the same dynamics, but even potentially a bigger impact, is when you go into commercial. So take like long haul trucking, for example. So in that space, you have situations where, you know, the average premium for a truck could be between, a single truck could be between $10,000 to $15,000 a year. And so the opportunity to employ an advanced set of inputs because of that scale is higher. So you're able to put a lot more in terms of, and it's also the incentive of the company to lower that cost, because that's obviously coming out of their budget, is paying for that insurance. So you have the opportunity to do all sorts of things around like driving behavior and around accident mitigation and proactive coaching, and also having records of what happened in the event of a claim. So you have a lot of opportunity to take the same concepts that are had been rolled out in the personal lines context and do so with potentially even greater impact in a commercial lines context. So when I think about where AI is going to be super helpful, I think of the most challenging, potentially unprofitable, like historically unprofitable and just technical products out there. So I think of things like long haul trucking and, you know, construction and cyber and things like that are where I could see AI making a tremendous impact in the next, you know, 3 to 5 years.
Great. So Michael, anything to add, or shall we move on to the next question?
Basically thinking about your comments, Maryann, around regulatory bodies being sometimes a point of friction, but sometimes always helpful, because ultimately insurance companies and regulators, they have a goal of, especially in pricing, to build products that are accurately priced. So technology, segmentation that you spoke about, customization, really plays into that. And AI as well, of course. And to Ian's point, which is there is a growing role for AI in especially the commercial space. And I'm the inventor on 3 patents, telematics related patents. So I have a great appreciation of that for commercial auto, actually. And it's generating so much data currently, and it's very differentiated from personal auto as well. There's more control there. There's more data, and I think to Ian's point, it's going to have a very big impact. At Liberty, we also had a lot of success with computer vision for property, commercial property as well, and using satellite imagery, that sort of thing. And it's pretty cool and amazing to see some of this, information being transformed into impactful products, in a sense, and having an impact on claims adjusters, on, after there's a disaster or some loss, things being information flowing in a quick pace, and being able to address that in a cost-efficient manner via this AI. So lots of opportunities, flowing in.
Great.
Yep.
Thanks, Michael. Patrika, next question. Which challenges do organizations encounter when implementing or actively using AI for insurance? Examples, please. As someone coming from the legal department, we regularly interface with all of the regulators, both at a federal and a provincial standpoint. And actually, that's why we're gainfully employed, because there are so many regulations. And my team and I are thankful for that. But jokes aside, I think regulation is one of the challenges. I think that companies often are the first adopters of this new type of technology. The regulators are slow to adoption and of understanding. And it takes a while to get them there. And so there is a regime in place that can appear a little stifling, and it's because it's typically out of date. And especially when it comes to anything that's technology based, it's moving so fast, that it's really hard for the regulators to stay up to date, and then to create a regulatory regime or governance structure that is flexible enough and modern and forward thinking that it can anticipate the changes moving forward. And I think this will be one of the greatest opportunities. But what I'm happy to see from many of the regulators in Canada is that they understand that they're always going to be behind the 8 ball because of the sheer amount of investment that corporations are putting into AI. And so they're really doing a very good job of working in collaboration with companies to say, okay, we don't know what we don't know, but teach us. And then can we consult on the governance around this? And I think if you're a good corporate citizen, then you're going to go there, and really think about fair customer outcomes, whether it's on the personal lines, commercial lines, specialty lines, whatever it is, because you know that it's in your interest to work towards level setting, and then also ensuring that the regulator's office has a role and that it's an effective role. So, Michael, any thoughts on some of the opportunities?
I mean, in general, insurance organizations are organized around their prime assets, which is information about their customer base, around the loss and experience that they collect over the years. How that gets used is one of the prime assets of their organization. As you see this different type of information and the amount, the volume flowing in, and this focus on AI and machine learning, it does change how the organization gets shaped. Obviously, you need a different skill set. You also need different models of strategy and governance to be able to work with all this data and meaningfully exploit it in a sense. Also, at the same time, and you appreciate this, Maryann, you need folks like legal to be up to speed on the risks and benefits of using this data. So it's almost the entire organization that has to focus a little differently than before, just because the nature of the data is different. And again, strategy and governance being part of all this is terribly important, and it creates the confidence within the company, within the firm, to move forward, get momentum, to be able to take advantage of a lot of opportunities that pop up. And every organization is different. They're built differently. Their investment and risk appetite is different. So how you organize again around that, it's super important. And there are some patterns out there, but again, you always have to customize your approach. And that's where some of the challenges, I believe, lie in not just doing projects and whatnot and exciting use cases, but how do you take that granular insight from doing some of these projects and roll it up into a more cohesive strategy overall?
Ian, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those were both really great points. I think one of the challenges that you run into for insurance specifically is it takes a long time to understand the underwriting impact of a new technology. And if you think about the way, and especially when you think about that, a lot of this innovation is coming from startups, they have very short time frames to generate certain amount of progress before getting to their next funding round. And so they can't wait, for an insurance company, we'd probably want to study it for over a year, if not multiple years, to understand that impact. And by then, they've either failed or gone on successfully to other industries. So it can be incredibly challenging to adopt that. And so I think in general, there's sort of this question of, do I study it and understand the full ramifications of this technology and then adopt it everywhere, or do I adopt it in small pieces and grow up? The other issue is that typically these systems add cost. So there's a presumption that it's going to improve efficiency, it's gonna automate certain things, and it's going to improve pricing and risk selection, but it also probably adds cost because you're paying for either the sensor that's extracting that data, you're paying to buy data. Like obviously these systems run on data, and that data is not costless. And it also probably involves tweaking and or completely rethinking the way that the policy admin system set. And so there's just a lot of changes that need to happen to make that work. And so it gets incredibly challenging to move quickly in insurance context, because you're starting to make decisions before you actually understand the full value, and maybe making investments in technologies without necessarily understanding the full value of those, which requires a very sort of step and disciplined approach to doing that, which is challenging. I would definitely double down on the earlier comments about regulation. If you think about, there's a lot of definitions of AI that get thrown around colloquially. And so if you think about it in a very, more static sense, then, it's already starting to occur. But again, that's looking backward, right? So it's saying, okay, I'm going to go get this new data source on all my customers, and using that, I'm going to slice them up more precisely, and I'm going to build an underwriting model, and then I'm going to take that model to the regulator, and it's static. Versus if you look at how it gets adopted by a Google or a Netflix, their models are constantly learning and constantly changing over time, which I don't think and I'm not an expert on regulation, but I don't believe that the context is set up in a way where your model can just change over time. So there are some, and that's for a good reason. That's obviously to protect the customers. So I think in an insurance context, there are challenges with adoption because of, again, doubling down on the regulation, but also just it takes a long time to understand the impact. And it takes and there's challenges operationally with implementing these systems at scale. And sometimes there's a chicken or the egg challenge, which ultimately kind of strings things out and delays the innovation there.
Thanks, Ian. So Patrika, next question, and maybe we'll try to go a little fast on this one. Have you seen an impact on company culture as processes become more AI driven? Michael, any thoughts? You're on mute, Michael.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think that's a very topical, a good topic. The answer is yes. We've seen quite an impact as people work from home. Obviously, that's expected. And in terms of course, culture, maintaining the culture, working together, and the question becomes, how does technology support that, right? And I'd go to this idea that insurance companies are basically, some would say, technology companies that sell insurance. So one aspect is, how do you start in this interesting, albeit unstable times, how do you support your employee agent base with stable technology as they work in different places and try to connect? And some companies have really risen to the occasion and got challenged along the way. And AI, I would say, is a big part of that, making employees work productively in agents as well. So beyond just underwriting, thinking about your, your prime assets as a company, which are the folks that work for the company. How do you enable that? Because that's kind of where it all starts. And also, it's changed essentially the patterns of risk as well. People that drive less. You have they're moving to EVs in a lot of cases, electric vehicles. So it's whilst one would like to have the luxury of quite a bit of time to be able to study this, things are changing pretty fast. And in some cases, folks are moving back into the office. How one does manage that? Again, it's via technology. AI is a big part of it, trying to understand patterns, issues, things like that. How do you support it? So yeah, the answer overall is yes. And COVID has changed how people work in this industry as well as others. And bringing the AI tools to bear on the problems and opportunities really is an important part of trying to deal with this changing times.
Thanks, Mike. Anything to add, Ian?
I'm not sure I have a ton to add. I think because of focusing on it from a venture perspective, I'm not sure I have anything to add to this one.
Yeah, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. It's the statement of the year, right? You're on mute. I was just going to really quickly add that I think there is a lot of buzz, and it does increase the dynamism, if you will, of a company culture. I know at Intact, there's a lot of excitement about the data lab. It's become the sexiest place to work in the company. Everyone wants to do something with respect to data and AI. And even in the legal department, even with respect to sort of ethics and data, I have no shortage of lawyers who want to assist with this. And I think that to everyone's point, which we've heard, there are great benefits. It is a huge competitive advantage for a corporation, but it needs to be managed accordingly. There are risks associated with the greater use of AI in the corporation. And it's not just the regulator's job to restrain corporations. It is everyone's job to look at it critically and really ask ourselves tough questions with respect to, we know what it can do for our corporations and bottom line, but the real sell for AI and big adoption will come from being very clear on the benefits to the customer. If those benefits are not articulated or strong enough, then there will be this undercurrent of, oh, data is being used for nefarious purposes. And there's so many movies made about that, and we don't want to be that industry. So maybe on that one, Patrika, can you add the last question that we've got?
I would just before that, I'd want to just double down on what you just said, because I think just to give some examples of that, I think, for example, we have a investment in AtBay, and if you look at what they're doing, yes, they're taking more data. Yes, they're bringing in this AI into the insurance process, but they're also stopping customers from getting breached and from having data breaches, and which is obviously really important for customers. They want to make sure that they're keeping their customers' data safe, and they're keeping that's not good for anyone, right? So I think there's a reason, and because of that, there's really good adoption. And I think the same thing. Another example, I talked about trunking earlier. We have an investment in HDVI, which is a trucking company, and again, they're trying to keep these trucking companies' drivers safer and out of accidents, and which is something that those trucking companies want. They want their drivers to be safe. They want they want their insurance premiums to be low, and everyone's kind of has aligned incentives there. And so I 100% want to agree, and I wanted to just call special attention to that it is really about creating value for the customer and not just taking data for the sake of taking data.
Yeah. Okay, last question. Where do you see the future of insurance headed over the next 5 years? Ian, why don't you wrap that one up for us? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a very broad question. I could take that so many ways. I'll focus, since this is an AI panel, I'll focus on the insurance as it relates to AI and not go off on a different way of looking at it. But I think it's very important to realize that insurers need to be thinking about error is not just being, so we're very comfortable with insuring human error, but I don't think we're necessarily as comfortable with insuring machine error. And I think as you have more and more decisions and more and more critical decisions being made by machines, I think we need to rethink how we think about that, because it's just that's sort of a paradigm shift. So it's not necessarily that AI is just changing the insurance industry. It's that AI is starting to change the world, and insurance needs to adapt to that. And there's actually, I don't know if it's already happened or not. I'm not sure the order, but I know someone from one of our business units, Michael Berger, is giving a talk, and they have like a proposition around insuring AI. I think it's really interesting. But I don't think it's just about that. It's also, in general as an industry, it's somewhat of a paradigm shift, and it'll be interesting to see how companies over the next 3 to 10 years start to respond to that change in the overall market.
Thanks, Ian. Michael, any closing words?
I'll echo that, meaning in the next 5 years, it's kind of hard to call it out, but definitely the trend will be as this large amounts of data flow in, AI is going to have a huge role to play in essentially realizing value from this big data, and more and more. And the one thing that's going to emerge is after this sort of exuberance with AI that we kind of went through, is how do you have a balanced perspective of what AI can do, right? And how do you make it sustainable also for the data as well? You mentioned, how much data you collect, and are customers comfortable with that? Do they trust, what you do with the data? Those are big points there that have to be addressed and have been addressed, especially by legal. And again, how do you create a balanced view of all these assets, AI, big data, and maintain that sustained return and realizing of value? I think we're squarely moving towards that point where this is going to be more routine, realizing value. And again, moving from this, hyper excitement about AI to a more mature view of what AI can do. And that's, thinking 5 years out. So it's a long time. Yeah,
I would agree with both of you. I think at the end of the day, we're moving in the right direction. I think there will be in 5 years even greater and greater adoption of AI in the industry. And the key is ensuring that we have the trust and confidence of our customers. And without that, then that adoption cannot truly materialize. And I think that increased trust and confidence will come with greater customer agency over their data. And this is where I think there's a big opportunity where potentially customers might monetize the use of their data, even data that we have historically thought we own. And maybe I'll end it at that, because we're going to open up a big can of worms on that topic. But There's definitely a very ripe and fertile ground for greater adoption of AI in the insurance industry. And Michael and Ian, you guys have been great. I've had a very, very good time chatting with you. And Patrika, I think I'm going to pass it back to you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. We really appreciate your insights, and I know this virtual audience is going wild with virtual applause. Thank you again. All right, for the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.